Alright, so we have the anterior surface of the skull. We have right here the frontal skull, frontal bone. We also have the frontal nasal suture right here. We have the supraorbital notch. This little gap right here on top of the skull. Then we have the nasal bone. We have the superior orbital fissure right in here. And we have the inferior orbital fissure. We have the vomer bone. We have the mandible. And we have the mental foramen on this little tiny notch right there. We have, up next, we have the maxilla. We have the inferior nasal concha. It's right in here inside the nose right there. We have the zygomatic bone. It's right here. And we also have the perpendicular plate and the middle nasal cocha. So this is the perpendicular plate and the middle nasal cocha. They both make the ethmoid bone. We have the lacrimal bone right inside the orbit. And we have the orbit canal right in here. And finally we also have the greater wing of the ethmoid bone right here. Lambdoid suture, sagittal suture,
all that by 2.
coronal suture, frontal bone, and parietal bone.
Okay, so here we have the posterior view of the skull. Here is a sagittal suture, which divides the parietal bones into 2. Inferior to the sagittal suture is the lambdoid suture. And then this is the occipital bone. So this is the squamous suture. So this is the temporal bone. And this is the mastoid process. This is the mastoid process. And then, so the superior neutral line is this. So this makes this the inferior neutral line. And then the foramen magnum is the big hole in the bottom. So in the middle of the posterior side of the skull is the external occipital protuberance, which is this. And then I already said that this is the lambdoid suture and this is the sagittal suture. Okay. Okay, here we have the inferior surface of the skull. So this is the maxilla. So this is the palatine process. And here we have the intermaxillary suture. And here is the palatine bone, the horizontal plate. And then we have, here is the vomer. And then the sphenoid bone. The zygomatic arch. This one is the foramen ovale. And then the foramen spinosum is the smaller one. And then the foramen lacerum is this one. Okay, so here's the carotid canal. And then here is the jugular foramen, which makes this the temporal bone. So this is the mastoid process. And then here we have the occipital condyle. And the parietal bone is this. This is the inferior nuchal line that we were talking about. And then this is the superior nuchal line, and then occipital bone. The external occipital protuberance is this in the middle. And then the lambdoid suture, this. Foramen magnum, again. Carotid canal, styloid process is in between. So the mandibular fossa is like this area. Can't even actually, no. Okay, just kidding. The mandibular fossa is this section. There's the whole mandibular fossa. So then the greater wing of the sphenoid bone is this. Yes, that's the correction. So then the pterygoid process of sphenoid bone is this. That's these two. So four pterygoid process of sphenoid bones. And then we have the inferior nasal concha on both sides. And then the zygomatic bone. And that should be everything.
So here we're looking at the external lateral surface of the skull. To begin off, we're going to look at the frontal bone, which is that blue portion in the front right side. Following that is going to be the sphenoid bone, which is the yellow bone right there. And then if you look to the side, you're able to see the ethmoid bone, which is a yellowish orange there. And just to the right is going to be the lacrimal bone that holds the lacrimal fossa. Following that, we're going to have the nasal bone, which is the orange bone just right on top of the nose. And then we're going to have the zygomatic bone, which is this orange bone right next to the orbital eye socket. And then we're going to have the maxilla, which is the green portion. And the maxilla is going to have alveolar processes, which are going to be those ridges or bumps, kind of where the gums would be. And then following that, we're going to have the mandible, which is the yellow portion on the bottom. It's going to have the mental foramen, which is going to be that hole at the bottom of the mandible. You can see it right there towards the front. Following that, it's going to be the mandibular angle, which is going to be the edge of the jawline. And then we're going to have the mandibular condyle. So right next to the mandibular condyle, you'll see a little notch known as the mandibular notch. And this area right here is going to be known as the mandibular ramus, and the process is going to be that pointy edge. If you look like superior, you can kind of see it there, and also just right there, if you stick the stick through it, you can see the process. Following that, we're going to see the parietal bone, which is the large green bone right here, posterior to the central sulcus and posterior to the frontal bone, separated by the coronal suture. And then to the bottom of that is going to be the temporal bone, which is the orange bone that I'm circling right here. That's going to have the external acoustic meatus and the mastoid process, which is the lump right there, and then the styloid process, which is the pointy part right there. And then following that, we're going to have the zygomatic process or zygomatic arch that connects the temporal bone with the zygomatic bone. And at the bottom, we'll see the occipital bone towards the back. Then we're going to look at the sutures of the lateral side. From the top, we can see that there's a coronal suture that separates the parietal and the frontal bone. That's going to be that one going vertically downwards. Following, we're going to see the squamous suture, which is going to separate the temporal and the parietal bone, kind of going laterally. And then finally, we'll see the lambdoid suture towards the back that separates the parietal, temporal, and the occipital. So here we're going to be looking at the interior surfaces of the skull. It's going to be a superior view of it. To begin off, we're going to look at the ethmoid bone, which is going to be this triangular shape, the general triangular shape here. If you look at the pointy side, the pointy bone that's coming out from the top is going to be known as the crista galli, which kind of looks like a mohawk. And then on both sides, we're going to see the cribriform plate, which kind of has these tiny holes around it. So next, we're going to be looking at the sphenoid bone, which is the general bat shape that you see in the middle of the skull. To begin off, we're going to look at the lesser wing, which is the ridge at the top of the bat's wing, and then the greater wing, which is the deeper grooves just under the lesser wing. Next is going to be the sella turcica, which is the middle bone that's in the middle of the bat shape. And then there's going to be the optic canal, which is going to be the hole just right on top of the bat's ear, which you can see me poking the stick through there. And following that, you're going to see the foramen rotundum, which is another hole that you can't really see on this model unless you were to get a closer view of it. And then following that, just to the right, is going to be the foramen ovale, which is another hole that you'll see me poking the stick through here. And just following that is going to just to the right of it is the foramen spinosum, which is going to be another hole, but you can't, on this model, it's not really, it doesn't go all the way through. And the one I'm poking through right now is known as the foramen lacerum. So then that's going to be the surface markings of the sphenoid bone. And then towards the top, we're going to see the frontal bone here, which is going to be a transverse cut, so we can't really see all of the bone. But within the frontal bone, we're going to have the anterior cranial fossa, which is going to be these deep grooves inside the frontal bone. So following the frontal bone, we're going to be looking at the temporal bone, which is just right under the sphenoid bone from the superior view. It's going to have the middle cranial fossa, which are going to be like these grooves inside of the temporal bone. It's going to have the jugular foramen, which is going to be the giant hole you can see here. You can pretty much fit a straw through it, so that's how big the jugular foramen is going to be. And so that general area is going to be known as like I said, the middle cranial fossa. And following that, we're going to be looking at the parietal bone, which is going to be the sides of the bottom of the superior view. Again, this is a transverse cut, so we can't really see the parietal bone too much. Is going to be the ridges on the sides. Finally, we're going to be looking at the occipital bone, which is going to have the foramen magnum, which is going to be the giant hole in the middle that stems from the brainstem down to the spinal cord, and finally the posterior cranial fossa.
Alright, so right here we have the vertebrae, starting at the bottom of the skull, going all the way down to the sacrum and coccyx. On the top of the vertebrae column, we have the cervical, which are starting right here with cervical 1, and there are 7 cervicals, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Underneath C7, we have the thoracic vertebrae, which there are 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Underneath the thoracic vertebrae, we have the lumbar vertebrae, and there are 5 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lumbar 5 connects to the sacrum, and the sacrum connects to the coccyx. So right here, we got C1 and C2 of the vertebrae. So yeah, cervical 1, cervical 2. This is the atlas. People say it looks like Yoda. And then we have the axis right here. And people say it looks like a praying man or a samurai. So using the C2, we're gonna find the structures of the vertebrae. Mostly all of them will have the same structures, but it's easier to see them on C2, well for me. But right here at the bottom, we have the body, the vertebrae foramen, which is a hole. We got the transverse process right about here, and the transverse foramen right there. We got the spinous process right here, and then the superior articular process right here, and then we flip it, we have our inferior articular fossa right about there. The lamina is this part right here, and the pedicle is right about here, this part right here. And that is our vertebrae structures for our vertebrae. All right, so here we have the sacrum.
The sacrum is the bottom part of the spinal cord. The sacrum connects to the spinal cord through the L5, lumbar 5 vertebrae right about here. So on the sacrum, we have the sacrum canal, which is right here. Sadly on this bone, we cannot unclip it to show the inside, but we do what we do. Then we have the sacrum the sacral foraminias, which are these little holes. We also have the superior articular faucet right here. We got the mediosacral crest, which are these little bumps right here in the middle. And then the sacral hiatus is right here in the bottom. It'll be like a little hole. And that's if we were able to clip off, we were able to see it much better. And then at the tip of the sacrum, we got the coccyx right here. And that is the sacrum and coccyx.